Have you ever heard the word concubine and wondered, just what is a concubine anyway? Is it just a wife? If it's just a wife, why is there a special word? How are a wife and a concubine different? And why did a system of wives and concubines even exist? To answer this question, and to keep things simple, we'll zoom in on the Ming Dynasty, the penultimate Chinese dynasty, and explore the world of emperors, empresses, rival lovers, and political power plays. Wives versus concubines. Who's who in the palace? In the grand cast of an emperor's household, not all ladies were created equal. The emperor had only one official wife, the empress. She wasn't just any spouse, she was the legal wife, the mother of the nation, and outranked every other woman in the inner court. Put simply, she was the queen bee. The empress usually came from a high noble family and had big duties. Primarily, produce the heir and manage the imperial household. She can be thought of like the first lady of ancient China. But here's the thing. Technically, Chinese law allowed only one wife at a time. And that's where concubinage comes in. So what exactly is a concubine? It's a bit of an oversimplification, but think of her as an official mistress with a title. Concubines were women accepted into a man's household, although accepted might be a generous word. They were often purchased or given in earlier times, much like servants. And though they held higher status than slaves, they still led difficult and dangerous lives and were not granted autonomy. Because of their lower status, they didn't get the fancy formal wedding or dowry that the wife did, and their children were a notch below the wife's children in inheritance and status. A concubine called her man master rather than husband, highlighting their position in the imperial household. But despite the lower rank, many concubines weren't commoners. Emperors and nobles often took concubines from respectable and even aristocratic families. These women lived in the inner quarters. Life for a concubine meant luxury and anxiety. A roof over your head, servants and silk robes, but also constant competition, strict rules, and the knowledge that they were a small fish in a big pond. So in order of status, you had the emperor, his wife the empress, and then the concubines. Now remember, we are only talking about the Ming Dynasty of China. I'm sure many cultures had many differences. So why even have concubines? Why would anyone construct such a complicated family arrangement? Was one spouse not enough? In ancient China's elite circles, the answer was often no, not if you can afford more. There were several reasons, practical, social, and political, for having concubines. First and foremost, heirs and spares. In the age of high infant mortality and political instability, having one wife to produce an heir seemed like risky business. Emperors and nobles wanted backup sons to secure the family line. More women in the family meant more chances of bouncing baby boys to carry on the legacy. This wasn't just a personal preference, it was practically state duty. Confucian tradition held that a man's ability to manage a large family and continue the ancestral line was a key part of his virtue and success. For the emperor in particular, ensuring a successor to the throne was of paramount importance. No heir, no empire. So better stock up on potential princes. There was also the status symbol angle. Having many women in your household was the ultimate flex of wealth and male virility in feudal China. It shouted, "Look, I'm so powerful and potent. I've got a small army of ladies and a future football team of sons." Much like a flashy sports car or a giant mansion might impress people today, a large harem showed you were a big deal back then. One Ming Dynasty writer noted that a man's presence of many women proved his vigor and social standing. This idea filtered down to the upper and middle classes too, although not to the lower classes. Politically, especially at the imperial level, concubines were bridges to powerful families. Marrying off a daughter to become an emperor's concubine could tighten alliances or keep ambitious warlords in check. It's harder to rebel when your beloved sister is chilling in the emperor's palace as a hostage/concubine. The upside for the family, if their girl caught the emperor's eye, they gained influence at court and possibly even a royal grandchild. The downside, other than being an involuntary live-in mistress, if she ever fell out of favour or never got noticed, the lightest consequence was just her fading into obscurity. But things could be much, much worse. Lastly, there was a moral, ritual rationale encoded into social norms. The duty to have many offspring often trumped notions of monogamous romance. Love was nice and all, but spreading your noble seed far and wide to produce sons for the greater good of the lineage was much more important. If one wife couldn't produce a son, because somehow it's always the woman's fault, concubines were the solution, a sort of officially sanctioned plan B for heir making. In theory, everyone was supposed to play nice. The main wife was expected to accept concubines without jealousy, as unity of the family and ancestor worship were higher ideals. There was even an expectation that the first wife should mentor younger concubines in harmonious behavior for the greater good. Yeah, the wife was just supposed to be a friend and mentor to her husband's 36 live-in mistresses. If you think that sounds like a recipe for drama, you're absolutely right. Which brings us to the next question. What was life actually like inside this crowded marital arrangement? Inside the Ming Dynasty harem, palace life, pageantry, and power plays. To bring this all to life, let's enter the Forbidden City during the Ming Dynasty, that's 1368 to 1644, a period when the imperial harem system was in full swing, fully formalized and frankly gigantic in scale. Ming emperors didn't do anything small, and their harem was no exception. Emperor Hongwu, the Ming founder, is said to have kept over 10,000 women in his harem. Even the famous King Solomon, with his 700 wives and 300 concubines, might have whistled in impressed disbelief at Hongwu's numbers. Even by later standards, this was extreme. Emperor Kangxi had a mere 2,000 or so consorts. But it shows the go big or go home attitude of Ming rulers. Essentially, the imperial palace was a mini city of women. Sometimes the life of a concubine can be romanticized as a scene of palace women at leisure. In reality, life of a concubine involved strict hierarchy and protocols beneath the gilded surface. So how did one end up as a Ming concubine? Ancient Chinese dating apps? Not exactly. It was more like a beauty pageant crossed with an exam and a finishing school. Selection was serious business. Ming records show that no household was exempt from contributing to the emperor's search for new concubines. All unmarried girls of a certain age were eligible for the draft. It was a multi-round elimination process. Out of thousands of candidates, only a handful would make the cut after assessing beauty, health, etiquette, arts, conduct, and if they snored or sleepwalked. By the end, the top finalists were groomed in palace manners and might even serve the emperor's mother as a maid to see if they were palace material. Those who survived were ranked and admitted into the harem. And here's an unexpected twist. I have called concubines mistresses a few times throughout this, so you might be surprised to learn that most would never so much as hold the emperor's hand, let alone bear a child. With hundreds of concubines available, the emperor could go years without meeting some of them. Many ladies lived out their days in luxurious solitude, royal wallflowers in gilded cages. Inside the harem, life was comfortable but highly regulated. Concubines had their own apartments, wore fine silk, ate well, and spent days on leisure activities, painting, pottery, music, embroidery, or simply gossiping in the endless waiting. They were forbidden from contact with any other men and were under watch by palace eunuchs at all times. Even the emperor's nighttime visits were a ritual. A concubine would be bathed and examined by doctors to ensure she was healthy. Then, a eunuch would carry a lantern with her name, if she was summoned, to the imperial bedchamber. It was all very choreographed. And yes, the emperor actually had officials to help schedule his intimate appointments. An imperial seating chart of romance to make sure no one felt completely neglected. They learnt the hard way that if you play favorites too much, it breeds dangerous jealousy. One Confucian principle warned that no concubine should monopolize the emperor's affections, an ideal that many emperors cheerfully ignored at their own peril. Of course, where you have hundreds of smart, ambitious women cooped up with one all-powerful husband, you get intrigue. The imperial harem was notorious for its political influence and scheming. Concubines vied to catch the emperor's eye with a strategic smile or an accidental meeting in the gardens, because one night with the emperor could change their life. If a concubine got pregnant and bore a son, her status skyrocketed. She might get a higher title, wealth, and if her son became heir, unassailable queen mother status down the line. As a result, stories of poisonings, backstabbings, cliques and conflict in the harem abound in history and legend. Everyone was playing chess and making gambits to seize power. Eunuchs often acted as the go-betweens and power brokers, since they were the only men allowed in this woman-dominated world. Some eunuchs became fabulously powerful by aligning with favored concubines. One infamous Ming eunuch, Wei Xiongxian, leveraged the harem's politics to dominate the whole imperial government in the 1620s. That was the kind of behind-the-curtain clout we're talking about. But if you think the concubines were all docile, prim and proper, think again. In the Ming era, a group of 16 concubines and palace maids literally banded together to assassinate the emperor, because Emperor Jiajing was by all accounts a cruel and neglectful tyrant. One night they sneaked into his chamber and attempted to strangle him with a rope made from silk sashes. Unfortunately for them, one maid lost her nerve and alerted the empress, who saved the unconscious emperor, and the plotters met a gruesome end. This story shows that while concubines weren't empowered, they weren't always passive either. Desperate times called for desperate measures, and harem life could be very desperate if you were on the wrong side of imperial favor. Social and political purpose of polygamous palaces. Beyond the personal drama, the system of wives and concubines served a clear social and political purpose in ancient China's hierarchy. It reinforced the patriarchal family as a microcosm of the state. The emperor was like the father of the nation, with the empress as the mother. Their union symbolized harmony with the empire. Concubines added a layer of extended family that tied noble lineages together. Each concubine's family, by virtue of their daughter's imperial role, had a stake in the regime's stability, and the promise of possibly bearing the next emperor kept those families loyal. It was a bit like old European monarchies using marriages to secure alliances, except here the emperor could make multiple alliances simultaneously by taking many concubines from different powerful families. On a social level, the harem demonstrated Confucian ideals of order and hierarchy. Everyone had a defined rank and place, each rank with titles, allowances, and respect proportional to their status. It was almost bureaucratic, mirroring the ranks of officials in the government. Running the imperial household was like running a small kingdom in itself, and it was thought that if a man, or the emperor, could maintain harmony among his mini-universe of women, it proved he had heaven's mandate to rule. Conversely, if the harem fell into chaos, it was a bad omen for the regime. Small wonder emperors' biographies often mention which concubines' squabbles spilled into political scandals. The personal and political were not so far apart in the palace. A bygone era of matrimonial mayhem. By the early 20th century, the ancient system of wives and concubines was on its last legs. The modern world holds gender equality and monogamy as much more noble virtues. The practice was officially abolished when the new Chinese Republic formed, and later outlawed entirely in 1949 under the communist government. Concubinage was a system of strict hierarchy, moral philosophy, and administrative processes around what was essentially a polygamous household. It served the purpose of securing the imperial line and as a display of wealth, power, and virtue. And it persisted in various forms for over 2,000 years because it was deeply woven into how power was distributed and passed on in Chinese dynasties. Today, concubines survive only in period dramas, history books, and the colourful imaginations of screenwriters. For a modern audience, the concept might seem straight out of fiction, a blend of fairy tale opulence and soap opera scheming. Yet, it was a lived reality for thousands of women for thousands of years, and was a cornerstone of imperial rule in China.